Welcome to Grammy's Garden, June 21st, 2020. Today's topics are tomatoes and fertilizers. Okay, you ready? Let's go to the garden. Hello everybody, here I am in Grammy's Garden. We're down at ground level. Today I'm going to talk about tomato plants. And here is a biggie. This is the midnight snack. It's a cherry tomato, and we're going to do some pruning and general upkeep of this tomato. Now, tomato plants are a vining plant. Believe it or not, this guy's standing up so straight and tall. It doesn't have tendrils that grab onto things like the peas and the beans, you know, the pole beans that are gonna grow up the trellis. But tomatoes are vining plants. So they need to be staked if they're going to stay off the ground. And a good thing is to keep them off the ground, because the ground contains pathogens and bacteria and a few other things that might not be so good for a tomato plant when you're trying to keep it healthy and keep it producing lots of good tomatoes. So I have a little tape here. This is kind of like a Velcro tape. I have some other kinds that you'll see me doing in the future to tie it up to this trellis here. Now, conceivably, this guy could grow up to 10 feet tall. He's an indeterminate tomato. There are determinate and indeterminate tomato plants. Determinate tomato plants have one particular size that they grow to. You know, usually sometimes they're called bush tomatoes or patio tomatoes or something like that. But this is an indeterminate one, meaning that its size is not relegated to what its gene says. The genes tell this one to keep on growing for as long as you can, produce as much fruit and as much seeds as you possibly can. So this guy's pretty strong, but he is going to need to be staked. So before I stake him, I want to show you a little bit about the anatomy of a tomato plant. Tomato plants have one single stem. You can see this stem here. And it will go on up, as I said, could be 6, 8, 10 feet, even if you had good growing conditions. These are branches, and on each branch are leaves that come on off of each branch. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 branches so far. Now, when I told you about keeping the tomato plant off the ground, let me just show you, tip the camera down a little bit. We have some leaves that are down here that are actually touching the ground. So when I want to prune these guys, I want to prune them to take the leaves that are way down at the bottom, that are touching the ground. I want to get them off the ground. So I've got my little scissor, and I'm going to just snip off the ones that are closest to the ground. They're pretty big ones, but we are going to do the best for the health of this plant. So that's all I'm going to take for now. There might be more. These are pretty significant sized leaves, but it's not going to hurt the plant. The plant's going to give plenty more in the future. And we're going to just redistribute these leaves just a wee bit. Now, another thing that tomato plants tend to do is they send off suckers. At the junction of a branch and the main stem, you'll see right here, there's a little tomato, what looks like a branch coming off of it. This is called a sucker. If I let this one grow, it will grow and have fruit on it too. But we, at this point, want most of the energy of this tomato growing into what you see here. These, you can see that kind of backlit a little bit. Flowers. Flowers mean fruit. So we're going to take off these suckers and we're just going to snip them just like we did before. Here's another one you can see off of this branch here. We're just going to snip that guy off too. And as we come up even farther, I guess you can see that one, right before the cluster of flowers, you can see here's another sucker. I'm going to take that one off too. It doesn't hurt too much to leave them on, but I want most of my growth going towards this cluster of flowers to produce more tomatoes. So now that we did that, we have a pretty upright standing tomato, but he's going to fall over once these fruits start growing. And you're not going to be able to, it's not going to be able to hold the weight of the whole tomato plant if, when they all grow out, it might tend to droop. So I'm going to take my little tie and, let's find a good spot. I think maybe I'll stick it to this one here. How about that? There you go. And that way it'll keep him going up. And just when I was doing that, I found another sucker. Just way down here, kind of in the back. The camera can't show it too well. I'm gonna snip that one off too. So, this is what I'm gonna have to do to every single tomato plant that I have here. I don't know if anybody counted the number of tomato plants. Anybody have any math skills? I have 15 in the first row. I have 14 in both of these rows. And I think I have about 6 or 7 of the orphan tomatoes in the other part of the garden. Now, Uncle Dan had a question about what were the orphan tomatoes. Well, the orphan tomatoes were tomatoes that I didn't have room for in my garden, and I tried to give them away, and nobody would take them, so I took them back. And I did find spaces in the garden to plant them, and they are doing very well now. So they obviously like the fact that I decided to keep them. Here's another tomato plant. It's getting pretty big. I usually start tying them up when they get to be about 18 inches, and I think this guy is pretty close to being there. He also has some nice flowers coming on. This is a Hungarian heart tomato. Okay, so we're going to, again, you can see this down here, we're going to clip some of these off at the bottom that are, here you can see, this is a sucker. Here's the branch, this is the main stem, branch coming off, and this is the sucker. So we're cutting off the sucker and this branch, because that branch is touching the ground. There's another one over here and one in the back. If you see these here, here's another sucker coming off this branch. This guy's really going to get a haircut. Oops, here's one in the back. If you see that way back there. There you go. Pretty good. Here's a little sucker right here. I'm just going to snip him right off. And there's one back here. I don't know if you can see it. Sometimes you can just bend them off with your fingers. Okay, so this guy's going to get tied up here, and I go get the rest of my tape. So I'm going to pick up these and throw them in my compost pile. Grandpa asked a question. He asked, what are the easiest and the hardest crops to grow in Grammy's garden. Well, the easiest one I found are the radishes. And everybody knows how Grandpa just loves radishes. You can see a couple in there. There's some over here. But radishes are a cold weather crop. They don't do well in the heat. So I've been having them bolt or go to seed, as you call it. Let me see if I find one here. This one here looks like it's about ready to go to seed. See how the stem elongates, and then it'll send up a seed, a shoot with seed pods. I might let that one go so you all see how that happens. I collected seeds one year and regrew radishes from those. While we're here, looky, looky, looky what's going up the trellis. That's a bean vine. Remember I talked about the tomatoes, how they would had tendrils going on up? Or they don't, but beans do. Anyway, we got a couple of them doing that. Very cool. Soon they'll cover the whole trellis. Now, the hardest one to grow is a carrot. Those are carrots, and they're growing pretty well, but as you see, there's a couple blank spots which I tried to reseed, and a couple have come up, a couple have not. In here, I'm not trying to grow a new flooring system, but I decided at Claire's prompt to put in some more colorful carrots. And this is a technique that I've decided to use after reviewing a number of different people's suggestions on YouTube. You water the area heavily, so under these boards it's really damp. You can see the difference between the soil under there and the soil next to it. Then you sprinkle your seeds fairly liberally because carrot seeds are so hard to germinate. You pat it down and put a board on top. I actually stepped alongside this board. The carrots will germinate in the dark, which is what most seeds like to do. And it will stay moist because we've been having some very warm days with little or no rain at all for the last couple weeks. So in about 4, 5, 6 days, we may have some carrots sprouting, some germination. And when that happens, and when a good deal of germination happens, I'll remove the boards and then be sure to water quite frequently so the little seedlings have plenty of moisture. But anyway, it worked. I put boards on the carrots over here in this row, in these 2 rows, and all the other carrots I had in the garden. And it worked fairly well. And we'll see how these work. It's not too late to grow carrots. These will be harvested, of course, later than the ones that are sitting next to the bean plants. Hello, master growers. Since it's so hot outside, 84 for those in the upper climes of the United States where that is just unbearable, I'm inside in Grammy's classroom. Today we're going to talk about fertilizers. I pulled these out of our cabinet in the garage. And these are all fertilizers that I have ever thought about putting on my garden. And most fertilizers are composed of, they're usually written 3 different numbers on each one. These I had to get, they're in the back in the ingredients. Bone meal 412-0. This is all-purpose plant food. Miracle Grow, this one is essentially the same. You can see each number is doubled. 1248, this is 24-8 16. This is a fish fertilizer. It's a 5-1-1. In the back here, we have what's called Trifecta Plus, and that is a 5-10-4. These are all things that I use either on my houseplants or in my garden. So what do the numbers mean? Over here to the blackboard. Here we are, fertilizers. The 3 numbers stand for NPK, meaning N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. Oh, and if you remember from chemistry class, those are elements of the periodic table, and they're abbreviated by those letters to make it easier for scientists to talk about all of these different chemicals. Okay, so plants anywhere in nature use nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as their primary elements in plant growth. The N, the first number in all of these fertilizers, is nitrogen. And nitrogen, what nitrogen does for plants is helps the leaves grow. So oftentimes you give them a boost of nitrogen when they're first starting out. It helps the leaves grow, and the leaves are the most important things to start because they start the process of photosynthesis, which helps each plant convert the sunlight into energy that then helps the cells in the plants grow. So nitrogen is always very important. Abby asked a question about the nitrogen growth spray. Well, actually what I've used, it's not a spray, but it can be a spray. I use the fish fertilizer. If you see, it's a 5-1-1, meaning that the nitrogen is a heavy component in this fertilizer. So it's going to give plants extra oomph for the leaves. I had that one plant that the initial leaves were rather yellow, and I talked about giving them an extra boost of a fish emulsion. And this is what I gave them. You mix it with water, so it's water soluble. And actually, I think one of the pictures in the very beginning of the video showed that plant and how it's doing extremely well after a little boost of the fish fertilizer. I also gave this to the pepper plants, and they seem to be handling it very well now. I think initially they had a little bit of transplant shock. So Abby, that's your question answered, I hope. The next element, the P, or phosphorus, is used by plants to build a stronger root system. It also helps build the stems into a stronger support system, and it helps with the flowering and the fruiting of the plants. If you looked over here, this is general plant food. This one in particular, you see the flowers down here. This is particularly for flowers and plants. So they want a heavy concentration in the nitrogen and a little bit, and not so much in the structure, you know, for holding up the plant and everything. Mostly in house plants and such. I rarely give this to plants in the garden because they don't need that much nitrogen now. I use the fish fertilizer when I want to do that. So that's phosphorus. The last element is K for potassium. Does anybody know why potassium is labeled K? Owen? Okay, so potassium. Potassium actually helps the plant with the transportation of the nutrients from the ground, getting them out of the ground through the root system and up the plant. That helps with keeping the cells full of water, the water retention in the cells, which is very important. If the cells are lacking water, that's when you see your plants are drooping. The leaves can't support themselves in a nice, in the stem in a nice upright position. So it's the transportation of the vitamins and the nutrients and everything in a plant up and down. So it's very important. And also there's an important part of the plant that the potassium helps out in, and it's the stomata. And the stomata are located on the undersides of the leaves. These are essentially the air holes with which the plant takes in the CO2 and gives off the oxygen. Now, I'm going to ask another question. If anybody can answer this one, why would these holes be on the undersides of the leaves? So this potassium helps in the respiration of plants. So that's about all I have. Back to these. Bone meal, when your soil is quite deficient in the phosphorus, this is a good one. This is not a water soluble. This over time will break down. This is natural. This is all natural. It's ground up bones. It has lots of calcium in it, and calcium is very important in plant growth too. There's calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are the three other important elements for plant growth. This one here, trifecta, it's a 5-10-4. It's a pretty good, good fertilizer also, general all around. It's not, again, water soluble. It's little granular little tablets, ground up little pieces that you sprinkle around the plant in the soil, or just before planting you put it in the hole with which you dug to put the plant in there. So, but the Miracle-Gro is not for garden plants, not necessarily. Fish fertilizer, lots of nitrogen to get them started. I probably won't need to give this to my plants any other time but in the spring to help that initial leaf growth. Okay, well, that was Grammy's classroom. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.